How do you and how should we think about power dynamics in relationships? Perhaps starting with romantic relationships. I've heard it said before that there's always power dynamics in relationships of all kinds. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that. And I've also heard that that's particularly salient in romantic relationships, independent of whether or not it's a homosexual or heterosexual relationship, that there's always, to some extent or another, one leader and one follower. This is a interesting, perhaps a controversial idea, but I've heard it enough times that I want to know more about it.
Sure. So power dynamics, of course, very important, but also something we tend to be so over-reductionist about. I mean, this idea, think about that there's always a leader and there's always a follower. Every single relationship, right? That's true on balance. Like we tend to be so reductionist. And then what we do is we miss the real power dynamics that are going on. Just like I had said in a previous episode, that I think my math minor has helped me the most for like all of life, right? I think a power dynamics course that I took as an undergraduate in political science has helped me the most as a psychiatrist. Took it long before medical school, because that class taught me so much about power dynamics. I thought it was going to be about overt power. Who has power over whom and tells whom to do what, right? But what I learned is so much of power dynamics are covert. They're under the surface. For example, they're the things that are not said. Something that was called at the time, at least, the issue of the non-issue, right? Where there's an issue between two people, like this person never takes out the garbage, that person always takes out the garbage, that person is resentful about it. Both of them know, but the person who always does it can't say so, because if they say so, the first person will punish them in some other way, right? By not taking out the garbage, then the place smells, that person goes to work and the person who's at home has to take it out, right? That's one example of the issue of the non-issue. Other examples are where someone is looking and smiling and being really nice to someone who they know is going to physically harm them if they bring to light that they're actually not happy and don't feel good about that person, right? So from the dramatic to the non-dramatic, unstated power dynamics are going on all over the place, and they're in every single relationship. I mean, unless a person is in a relationship with someone else and they're both comatose. No, I guess only one of them has to be comatose, right? There are power dynamics going on. But again, it doesn't mean that they're unhealthy, right? Because there are always power dynamics. So then what are we looking for? And again, there are a lot of things we could look for, but we could talk about really two primary things. One is look for the non-obvious, and two is the give and take. So the first, even in our own relationships, because it's interesting how many people will say, talk about the power dynamics in their relationship. They're not always saying, here are the power dynamics in my relationship, but they're telling me about them. And they're telling me about the things that are overt, right? Now, somewhere inside of them, they know that, they can't really raise issue A, B, or C, or there'll be some retribution, whether it's small or large, or they might even know everything's okay and that person is happy, but they know I'm not giving them room to say that they're not happy. And that could just mean, if they say they're not happy, then I'll come home a couple hours late the next day, and that person will feel some attachment and security because of that. And, there are all sorts of ways this can play out, but since so much of power dynamics are unstated or covert, kind of like the iceberg of conscious and unconscious, there's an iceberg of power dynamics. So to think about, including in one's own relationships, whether it's a neighbor, it's a friend, it's a work relationship, or most charged, it's romance, what's really going on between us, right? What's really going on between us? I'm not looking to tell myself lies, right? I know that I may not be able to understand all of it, but let me stop and think about it. And people, if you ask people to stop and do that, they can say, yeah, this is really not okay. Or, because sometimes they don't know that it's there, or they don't want to know that it's there. And the therapy work is trying to guide them to, there's an immense power disparity, maybe, in the relationship when they're presenting, no, everything is equal. It's a good supportive relationship. You hear that a lot. And of course, it's not always that there's something bad under the surface, but a lot of times there is. And even something mildly bad is not okay and can cause problems. And sometimes there's something very bad. So look for the non-obvious. And then the second is that give and take is a very good sign of health. It is a very good sign of health. So if a person can kind of see that there's give and take, and it might be about something as simple as like, who chooses where we go to dinner? okay, sometimes one, sometimes the other, depends who has a stronger feeling. Or it may be that person always decides where we go to dinner, but the other person's okay with it, right? And that person always decides what movie they want, the other person, right? So the idea that there's give and take, and then in periods of time where one person may be in a more difficult place, one person has a significant loss, right, or an injury or an illness, then you see that shifts a little bit. One person is giving more, right? But then ultimately the idea is that's from the outside, right? If one person is giving more to the other, there's a generosity of spirit in both the giving and the accepting, right? That leads them to then be stronger together. So even when people say, well, there are imbalances, in some way, if you just look at what's going on day to day, but in a healthy relationship with high generative drive, the periods of imbalance strengthen the relationship. Right? You see this with friends where two people have a pretty equal friendship, and then like one person has something difficult happens and the other person is there for them. What's true on the other side of that? They're better friends, right? And it's also why we often want to be interconnected when we're healthy. What if something bad happens to both of them? Right? It's good to be interconnected, and friends and family can be supportive to us. So the idea that give and take is healthy, I think is very central. So just looking for evidence. That's often if I don't understand like what's going on in the relationship, maybe it's early in the therapy or it's just been kind of opaque or I can't figure it out. I'm looking for, is there give and take? Because then I'm going to think, okay, more likely than not, things are healthy. If I see an imbalance, whether the person knows it or not, I'm thinking more likely than not it's unhealthy. And then they're just clues along the pathway of my efforts to understand.